Hello, everybody. Dembash, Chawanan. I hope you have all had the chance to tune into the lectures in our spring speaker series so far. Today's talk is especially timely given the recent events in the region. Our guest speaker will be presenting on future pathways for Kurdish politics, autonomy, sovereignty, and the Middle East order. My name is Mustafa Durmaz, and I serve as a Kurdish language instructor here at Zahra Institute. I'll be introducing our guest speaker and moderating the Q&A session after the presentation. As you listen to the presentation, I invite you to type any questions as you may have into the chat box. We'll address as many as questions we can once the lecture concludes. If you happen to miss the part of the lecture for whatever reason, this lecture will be recorded and will be available on our social media accounts, such as on YouTube, Facebook, and others. And now, let me introduce you to our honored guest. Dr. Omar Sheikhmous is a distinguished Kurdish scholar, researcher, and political activist whose work has shaped Kurdish studies and political engagement for decades. Educated in London and Stockholm, he supported Kurdish resistance movements, co-founded the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan in 1975, and later taught political science and migration studies in Sweden. He directed the Kurdish service of the Voice of America, served as the advisor to the President Jalal Talabani, and has been deeply involved in supporting Syrian civil society since 2011. Since 2018, he has contributed to the diplomatic initiatives and efforts focused on peace building and minority rights in Syria. Dr. Sheikhmous has also published extensively on Kurdish issues, human rights, migration, and Islamic studies. So, with that being said, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to the guest speaker, Mamostad Dr. Omar Sheikhmous. Mamostad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kak Mustafa and Shahrina. It was very kind of you to invite me to this event, and I gladly wanted to participate. I recognize a number of names already that I see in your list, that we are either friends on Facebook or we have got in touch on Kurdish Studies Network. The question here of the future pathways for Kurdish politics, autonomy, sovereignty, and the Middle East order. Unfortunately, the Israelis and Donald Trump and the Iranians have more or less destroyed the hopeful order that was expected to take place and gradual developments that might follow as far as normalization is concerned before Hamas started with their operations on 7th of October. That has complicated matters very much. So unfortunately, there was a very hopeful development as far as a new Middle East order is concerned, but we are seeing that it's being complicated and being shattered, and we don't know where events are going. That's the general picture as far as the Middle East order is concerned. I will return back to that. I wanted just to give you a number of background facts as far as our talk is concerned. One of the most important background facts that I want to always stress is that most of the states in the Middle East are new and modern creations after the First World War, or even as late as the 50s and the 60s, like in the Gulf states and even Sudan. So these states are not eternal creations, and they are not sacred ones either. There is always a possibility of changes to take place as far as their borders are concerned and their creations are concerned. They are only eternal and sacred in the eyes of their nationalist subjects who think in terms of holy creations for their nation without taking consideration to other groups within the boundaries of these states. Because our experience as well historically has shown us a number of times that multinational states have actually collapsed and new states have been formed. If you look at the Habsburg Empire, if you look at the German Empire, if you look at the Roman Empire, if you look at the Greek Empire, if you look at the Ottoman Empire, if you look at the Persian Empire, and these states, even if you go as recently as the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, that was shattered into different states as well. So therefore, I want you to keep in mind that these borders that exist that were created by either the mandatory power or the colonial powers after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East are not eternal creations. There might be a possibility that these might change one day. And one or two of the subjects that were treated very badly by history are the Armenians and the Kurds. Although their rights were recognized in the Syria Treaty, but later on it was renegated in the Lausanne Agreement after Kemal Atatürk came on the stage and fought the Greeks and the Allied forces to create modern Turkey. So one of the things that and of course, you all know better than me, those who come from Turkey, that Kemal Atatürk promised the Kurds a number of rights to join the National Assembly, but then he renegated and denied them these rights that were promised in the National Assembly. So these states that are modern creations, they have tried extremely hard to establish centralized structures because they were created by colonial administrations like the French and the British and Germans and others. So this question of creating very centralized states for the majority nations of these states, newly created states, where they denied actually the rights of the minorities and wanted to assimilate them by force. So there were no democratic aspirations or even willingness to recognize the rights of the different groupings, nationalities, ethnic groups, religious groups within the borders of these states in the Middle East. And therefore it was done by force or by forced assimilation. And you know the history of how they treated the Armenians and the Kurds and other minorities in Turkey and other places. Their policy as well was to forge a nation and in the process of nation building by force against the will of the subject nations that are part of these states without democratically recognizing their rights. They were using all sorts of ways and methods in order to assimilate these minorities. And that's not unique for the Kurds in Turkey and Syria and Iraq and Iran, but even, sorry, they more or less wanted to forge and form a new nation out of its constituent parts by force, and this was done even here in Sweden. Excuse me. So that they, for example, the Australians and the English-speaking people used the same method against the Aborigines. The Swedes used it against the Samis and the Lapis. The Danes used it against the Greenlanders. The Canadians used it against the Eskimos. And Turkey used it against the Kurds and the other minorities, where by force they were assimilating these. And they all actually copied each other as far as in this process is concerned. One of the things that also is very unique for these is that these governments or these new states, because they did not have aspirations to establish democratic countries or democratic political systems, they were forcing their will on their own people in either in fixing elections or arranging recurrent coup d'etats, military coup d'etats every now and then in order to stop the process of democratization of or other groups. You had in Turkey in 1960 where they executed Adnan Menderes and others just because they won the elections, and then there were experiences like that in many other countries as well. Is that the question is, in Syria, we had the experience of having military coups from 1949, only 3 years after the first period of independence. And then these recurrent military coups continued until 1996. So there was a joke even among the Syrian people that the military officers used to go to the officers club and they have dinner and drink, and then they decide to organize a military coup because they were so recurrent. In Iraq, it was the same, in many other countries as well. And these were usually, later on, many of them were parts of extreme nationalistic parties, like the Ba'ath Party, for example. And they established not only military dictatorship, but also party dictatorships that continued for years and years, like the Assad family in Syria and the Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, and so on and so forth. Yeah, one of the traits of these states was that they did not have their own traditions, and they did not want to copy the administrative practices of the mandate powers or the colonial powers. So they more or less were influenced by Soviet states or third world radical nationalist states by establishing state planning structures that were copying the Soviet model in running these countries. And as one-party states, as state planning is concerned, as far as control of media, as far as legislation for political parties and so on and so forth. So they more or less copied each other very much in order to run these countries. But the problem is that most of these models that they applied or they copied or they took over is that after a decade or two, they failed to solve the essential problems of their populations. So if you have a look at the different models that were established, excuse me, the models that were established in these countries, whether they were socialist or nationalist or one state parties and so on and so forth, they could not solve the essential needs of their populations. So you found out, you could see that after a decade or two, people would recurrently have uprisings and change their governments in mass uprisings like in Sudan, in Egypt, in Libya, and in other places, in Syria, and so on and so forth. Like we see even now in Iran, although they are having their chance, but they haven't taken the chance they did when the Islamic Republic was in charge. But now, when the Israelis and the Americans are hitting them so hard and giving them possibilities to change the regime, there is no such move. There are a lot of explaining factors for that. The other thing is that when these modern ideologies that were established with these states, like nationalism, socialism, state planning, state capitalism, and so on and so forth, did not succeed, one of the reactions that one could see is that people started to turn to religion for their liberation and for their saving themselves, and therefore you see an upsurge of religious movements in many third world countries because of the failure of these states and models that had existed in many of these countries. And one could see actually that it started in Iran, and then in Egypt, and then Algeria, and Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Turkey, and so on and so forth. But then, of course, there was another aspect. People, when they returned to religion as well, when these religious groups and parties came to power, they also failed in solving their problems. Whether it was the Muslim Brotherhood, or it was Daesh, or it was the Islamic Republic of Iran, again, they had so many shortcomings that people were dissatisfied and they could not solve their problems that they had supported for the change that was taking place. So what happened is that you find that you get different versions of Islamic movements, like the Wahhabi movement, or the Salafi movement, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, or the Takfiri groups of Daesh and ISIS and Al Qaeda and others, and Taliban, and they are providing solutions that are not acceptable to the people. So although people maybe support them at one time, but in the long run, they also failed to solve their problems. Of course, there was the question of animosity and hatred and fighting against them as well by the West and by other secular groupings within these states, that they could not continue. The other thing is that they had a chance to come to power in Algeria and Egypt and Sudan as well. But then after a few years, they failed miserably, and people changed them in uprisings. Now, as I started talking at the beginning, as far as the Middle East order is concerned, unfortunately, there was some hope before the 7th of October attacks by Hamas on Israel and its consequences. There were discussions of possibilities of normalization and talks and negotiations in improving relations between different countries in the Middle East, and maybe get a normalization process in the Middle East. And there were different discussions. One of them was the paper that I actually sent to you on the vision, strategic vision for a future Middle East, is that a number of people since the 1990s, we've been thinking about finding a solution to the problems of the Middle East by including Turkey, Iran, Israel, and the Arab countries in a conglomeration similar to the European Union, the common market, or the coal and steel community that were established in the 1950s, and then establish institutions in the Middle East that would become bridge builders and come over all these wars that have been going on for decades and that have been very destructive. But unfortunately now, this turbulent change that has taken place now is more or less putting a big hinder for such a although Donald Trump and Netanyahu are dreaming of forcing or going for a regime change in Iran, and as a consequence of that, they might be able to reach a settlement with the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in order to reach a normalization process with the Arab countries and the other countries in the Middle East, so that there won't be any more wars. And we have heard this phrase so many times, that the First World War was the war that will end all wars, that other wars were also the same, and everybody is talking about this war as well, that will put an end to all these tense relations and so on. Of course, there will have to be a solution for the situation in the Middle East, and there will have to be an accommodation, but it will have to be on a much more just basis, more respect for human rights, more respect for the international law, and without these abhorrent crimes that are taking place against whether it's the Gazans or the West Bank or the Kurds or other groupings in the Middle East. I mean, we could see what took place in Sheikh Mahsoud and other places, what took place against the Yazidis, and the same goes for the Alawites and the Druze as well in Syria. So, so as I said, there are thinkings, there are people who have been very wise and thought about finding a solution for the future of the Middle East in getting out of this dilemma that was similar to the European stage before World War II, especially between Germany and France, and the common European institutions were a way out in finding a common ground in order to work together and get over these historical enmities that took place. I personally, I've written about this. Shimon Peres has written about it. Madeleine Albright has written about it, and there are a number of other people as well. We certainly hope that we'll be able to find a way to find a solution for these conflicts in the Middle East by a pluralistic democratic way, in accepting each other and establishing democratic systems that would accommodate the demands of their people and so on, instead of continuing on this destructive path. As far as now the Kurds are concerned, and the pathway for them, the Kurds, like many of the nations in the Middle East, went through different stages as far as their demands are concerned. They, like the Armenians, the Arabs, and others, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, they were working for independence, and they managed. By the way, we are having an event in Italy at the end of this month. We have found the grave of Sharif Pasha Khandan, who negotiated on behalf of the Kurds at the peace conference in Paris in 1920. And he and the Armenians, they managed to get recognition of an Armenian and a Kurdish state. So we are going to have an event, and we will visit his grave in a small town in the southeastern Italy. It's called Catanzaro. It will be around the 19th, I think, the 19th or the 20th of this month. So Sharif Pasha managed with the Armenians to agree on a formula that agreed to an independent Kurdistan. But later on, of course, Kemal Atatürk managed to annul that agreement, and Lausanne came instead, and the Kurds could not get their state. Then we had the Ararat movement that again was asking for independence. The Sheikh Said movement was asking for independence. Sheikh Mahmoud in Iraqi Kurdistan, the same thing. Sheikh Ubaidullah in Iranian Kurdistan. And this continued until more or less the Second World War, when the Mahabad Republic was established, the Kurdistan Republic of Mahabad, with the support of the Soviets and the Azeris. And later on, of course, under the influence of the Soviet Union and the Azerbaijani Communist Party, they changed the slogan. Instead of having independent states, they agreed in having something called the Autonomous Republic of Kurdistan and the Autonomous Republic of Azerbaijan, that will form a federation together under the auspices of the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, this discourse continued as far as the Kurds are concerned. They were influenced very much by the thinking or the ideology of the communist and socialist parties of the Middle East, that there should be unity with the working class of these nations and work together to liberate their countries, and then they will get their rights instead of going for independence. But of course, this was a very difficult path. But in essence, what happened is that the Kurds, because of the Cold War as well, the Cold War was, after 1946, was a very tight political system, international political system. There was something that's called the zero-sum game, that any gain for any part is a loss for the other part, and therefore they could not tolerate any changes of borders within the Middle East, because it was construed as a gain for the other side. So the West was very much against the Kurds and the Armenians and the others in getting autonomous republics, even in Iran, and later on for the Kurds in asking for independence. So the Kurds as well became much more practical, pragmatic, and they started asking for cultural rights, linguistic rights, political and democratic rights, and then self-governing rights. So that's why you find the slogan of democracy for Iran, autonomy for Kurdistan, democracy for Iraq, autonomy for Kurdistan, the same for Syria as well. In Turkey now you have a peace process that have different slogans, and it's still not finished. There are a lot of negotiations. We don't know where it's going to lead, but in essence, it is not a question of independence. But this does not mean that there might be situations in the future that precede exactly like in Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, where peacefully you suddenly got a creation of 7 to 13 states in both countries, without any problems. There is a possibility. There are now certain chances that are opening up for the Kurds because in Iraqi Kurdistan they have a status, they have a federal status, they have their own parliament, their own government, and they are quite strong as far as military, economics, and so on is concerned. In Syria as well, they have a mini state. They have as well a structure that's now gradually being accepted by the Syrian government with guarantees from France and the United States and many other countries as well. And the Kurds are very strong and they played a very important role in fighting Daesh. And then, of course, the model that they provided as far as gender equality is concerned in both the administration and the military forces, that has left a very positive image about the Kurds in Syria. So we have now possibilities that are opening up for the Kurds in Iraq, in Syria, and now, of course, in Iran, and then the peace process in Turkey, which might lead to certain developments that could be very positive for the Kurds. And of course, it depends. Internationally, there is a lot of sympathy, there is a lot of support, there is a lot of acceptance of Kurdish rights. But again, it depends on the Kurds how much they can get united and work together and establish common structures in order to put forward their agenda in achieving their aims together in these different countries. And this is extremely important. And one could see actually now in the fighting after Sheikh Massoud and Ashrafia in Aleppo, how very strongly the Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan came to the rescue of Rojava, and they were sending help and support, and they were sending their own Peshmergas or fighters, and there was a very unique solidarity that was not uncommon, but quite special, as a matter of fact, as far as humanitarian. Then there is one aspect that I want you to consider, which is very important. I am an old man now. I'm 84 years old. I was born in 1942, and I got involved in politics in 1958 when I was 16. I mean, in the 1950s, we were dreaming of a Kurdistan, of Kurdish rights, and we were then, everybody was saying that the Kurds are maximum 8 million people, and then that these governments will never accept their rights and so on. And then most of these areas, the Kurdish areas, they were underdeveloped. Although the natural resources were very rich in the Kurdish areas, but the central governments were using these natural resources not to the benefit of the local population, but to the benefit of the central government. And it was in a very, very unfair way, used in a very unfair way. Now, the number of the Kurds is at least something like 50 million people in these countries. Secondly, they are all very aware now, and they are very conscious about their rights and their identity, and they're asking for rights. And then they are building bridges with the democratic forces in the countries that they live in, and with the international public opinion as well. So internationally as well, there's much more openness in accepting Kurdish rights and helping Kurds to get their rights, especially the role that they played Daesh and other jihadi groupings. And then there is an element in Kurdish culture that people respect quite a lot, especially in Europe and the United States and other areas of the world. In our culture, apparently, and I'm not going to exaggerate, there is a certain respect for women's rights and the status of women. It's not perfect, but relatively speaking, and in comparison with neighboring nations, the situation of Kurdish women is relatively better and much more accepted. And even in the fighting forces and the administration of Rojava in the Iraqi Kurdistan, and now even within the ranks, this is attracting the attention, support, and sympathy of international public opinion in supporting the Kurds and sympathizing with the Kurds in this one. Then there are two other elements that I want to mention before I finish, and that is in our society, I mean Kurdish society, it's so pluralist and multicultural and multi-ethnic and multi-religious, so that over the centuries, the Kurds have learned to coexist with each other. I mean, you have Yazidis, you have Kalkis, you have Ahl Haq, you have Yarsans, you have Christians, you have Jews, you have Muslims, you have all sorts of Shiites and Sunnis, and these have lived together. There have been problems sometimes, of course, but generally speaking, in comparison with neighboring nations, the Kurds have managed to preserve this culture of coexistence and living together, despite the cultural differences and the religious differences that are. And this has attracted the attention of the world, that there is something peaceful about the Kurds as far as their treatment of each other is concerned, or even treatment of minorities is concerned. The other thing is that's also attracting attention quite a lot as far as the Kurds are concerned. There are hardly any jihadi or fundamentalist groups within the Kurdish society. There are Kurdish tariqats. There are Naqshbandi, and there are Qadri, and there are Hanbali, and many other Shafi'i, and many other people are religious, and they pray and they fast and so on. But you don't see fundamentalist movements being created within Kurdish society. The only ones that have existed since the 1980s are either by support from Iran or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Qatar. They are not indigenous movements. And this, of course, also attracts attention to the Kurds. Something else which is very important now. Kurdistan is no longer underdeveloped and poor. If you look at any area of the Kurds, I mean, before they were deliberately by the central governments, they were kept underdeveloped economically, industrially, agriculturally, and so on and so forth. But now, if you take any area in Kurdistan, you will find that it is much richer than its neighboring areas with oil, gas, water, and agricultural products. And then, of course, they are managing their resources in a much better way than the rest of the country. I mean, if you compare Iraq with Iraqi Kurdistan, you'll find quite a difference between both parts. If you take, despite all the problems in Syria, if you take Rojava and the rest of Syria, the situation in Rojava is still much better than the rest of Syria. In Turkey, of course, there is the problem of a deliberate policy of keeping Kurdistan underdeveloped. In Iran, the same thing. But there are resources, and there will be very they're playing very good role. Then, of course, the last thing that I wanted to mention is apart from the role that the Kurds played in fighting Daesh, in saving the world and defending the world, and sacrificing something like at least 25,000 of their youngsters, men and women, in Syria and Iraq in order to protect the rest of the world. But there is something else as well, which is very important, is that they actually, apart from the fighting is concerned, they have more or less, sometimes single-handedly managed to stop the advance of Daesh and ISIS against the Kurdish areas and even other areas in Syria. So this is more or less is taking into consideration, and it has become an asset for the Kurds, and it's playing a role in recognizing the rights of the Kurds, with a lot of difficulties, negotiations, problems, and so on and so forth. But the situation, as is concerned, as it exists now, the situation, relatively speaking, for the Kurds is much better than the time that I was talking about in the late 50s or the late 60s. We were then actually were very worried that our language, our culture, our existence was threatened. But now, fortunately enough, our language is developing, our culture is developing, our existence is no longer under threat. We are actually much more stronger than many of our neighbors, and we are playing a big role in the future of these areas in the future. I mean, you cannot ignore the Kurdish factor anymore as far as Middle East is concerned. You will have to take the role of the Kurds into consideration. This more or less is the end of what I wanted to say. And let's take some questions. And please feel free to put any questions you like. I have no reservations whatsoever. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mamosta, for this insightful presentation. Now we will begin our Q&A portion of our lecture. Please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. You may also raise your hand on Zoom if you'd like to ask your question directly. Let me see. We have a question from Ardalan Faraj. So he's asking, do you think Kurds in Syria will have a region like Iraqi Kurdistan in near future? And a second question, what do you think about current position of Kurds in Iran?
Okay. As far as the Kurds in Syria are concerned, there is a structure, but unfortunately, Turkey stopped the development for that structure to crystallize by attacking Afrin in 2018, then attacking Serekaniye and Kobani later on as well in 2019. So this more or less undermined the geographical continuation of the Kurdish areas in establishing a joint geographical area. Although before as well, there were some Arabs in between, as far as Ras Lain and Serekaniye and Kobani are concerned. Tel Abyad, for example. Tel Abyad was not all Kurdish. Then between Kobani and Afrin as well, there were some Arab tribes. And of course, these created problems as to what sort of status and problem will be. Our friends in PYD, they managed to get the geographical connections between the areas, but of course the Arabs were accusing us for ethnic cleansing and things like that, and Turkey was using it as well. But now something unique happened in Syria. Despite the fighting that took place in Sheikh Mahsud, and these militias that were pro-Turkish, they are not only pro-Turkish, they are actually connected directly to the Turkish intelligence. And are mainly Central Asian. They are Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Chechens, Kyrgyz, and so on and so forth. And they played a very important negative role in both against the Alawites and against the Druze and against the Kurds in Ashrafi and Syria. The same happened in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. But now, after 3 or 4 agreements, they have managed to reach a solution which is guaranteed by France and the United States. I mean, in all the sessions of negotiations between Ahmad Shar and Mazloum Abdi, there were always either US or French representatives. But in the final negotiations on January 29, the French and the Americans were there as guarantors. And what has happened is unique in Syria. For the first time in Syrian history, this decree number 13 that Ahmad al-Shara put out, it officially recognizes the existence of Kurds in Syria. It recognizes the existence of the Kurdish language. It gives the right to education to the Kurds. It recognizes Nowruz as a national holiday. It gives the right of displaced persons to return to their areas. And it gives the right to Kurds to local governance. So what's important in the general picture now is this. They have agreed, and today actually we saw that Sepal Hamo has been appointed as Deputy Defense Minister. Ilham Ahmed will be appointed as the Foreign Minister, Deputy Foreign Minister. And I was actually in meeting with them in Hasakeh when the fighting was taking place in January in Rojava. And she asked me, she said, they are asking me to become deputy. Should I accept? Because we have had contact a number of years together. I said, yes. She said, why? In front of her friends, of course. I said, well, because first, you are more clever than he is. You are a woman, you have much more experience, and you will take control of the foreign ministry if you accept. So there's no harm in you accepting. But then, of course, they had asked Mazloum Abdi to become deputy president. He did not agree. They might find somebody else. And I think he took the right decision because the future of this government is not clear. We don't know how long they will stay. We don't know when the elections will be, although they are saying that it will be in 3 years. But in my opinion, it was a good decision not to burden himself with this administration anyhow. But what's important is that now the SDF forces will not be disbanded. They will be structured as 3 military divisions that will serve in the Kurdish areas and will be part of the Syrian army. So they will be SDF Kurdish forces serving in Hasaka, in Kobani, and in Afrin, but they will be part of the Syrian army, like the Peshmerga in Iraqi Kurdistan. Secondly, the problem for them was the women forces, the YPJ. For these jihadis, it was problematic how to accept them. So they found a solution that they will be part of one of these divisions. I think it is the division in Kobani. These women forces will be part of this division in the Kurdish areas. The other thing that is also very important, the agreement stipulates that all the administrators from these areas, will be from the local population. So there'll be Kurds or maybe Syriacs and maybe some Armenians and Turkmens. But the majority will be Kurds, and the principle of local governance is accepted. The question is that there are negotiations. How far is this local governance? Some are asking for. What's interesting now and what's helping us in Rojava is this. The Druze and the Alawites and the Sunni Arabs, the secular Sunni Arabs and the Christians, they were actually against Kurdish demands for decentralization and federation before, during the Assad regime. But now they are insisting on the Kurds not to accept less than federation. So they are more or less becoming the spearhead for decentralization and federalism in Syria. And they are even asking the Kurds to take over the government in Syria rather than becoming partners with them. So the situation has changed a lot. Something else which is very important is this, that they have made this agreement, as I said, with the Americans and the French as guarantors. They have agreed that no military forces from the Syrian army or from SDF is going to enter any cities. They should have camps 10 kilometers outside the cities. Then the final thing, which is very important, the Syrian security forces, they will not be able to come to the Kurdish areas and Kurdish cities like before and play with the destiny of people as they wish. But these security forces, they will jointly with Asayish of the administration, the Kurdish administration, they will form a joint security administration that will run the security of these areas. So this is not 100% satisfactory, but it is 60 to 65% satisfactory as far as concerned, in my opinion.
Okay. Mamusta? So there's another question from Ardal Faraj. What do you think about the current position of Kurds in Iran?
In Iran, okay. It's too complicated now. It's extremely complicated and we don't know. There are a number of positive signs, and I am engaged with them as well, and I'm trying to help them in getting help and so on. Donald Trump promised certain things and then he backed out. But we are actually all of the opinion that they should work together, and they have established an alliance together of 7 parties. And they are working together.
Okay.
Other thing is that they are not accepting the Shah San as an alternative. They are asking for a democratic governance and so on. Then, of course, Donald Trump, strangely enough, this guy is out of this world. He phoned and talked to Barzani and Talabani and Mustafa Hijri directly, and asked them about what they can do and not. And then he backed. But what I am being told that this is a scenario. The project will continue. They will cooperate with the Kurds. They will give them a lot of money and weapons, and they will prepare them in moving into Iranian Kurdistan to make a diversion. But the problem is that the Iranian people are not moving. They moved quite a lot even until January, but now when the situation and the chance is there isn't an uprising that's taking place. But if something happens, and there it's the same scenario. They have decided that they will take over all the Kurdish areas, establish an administration, and ask for either a federation or local local governance in Iranian Palestine.
We have a question from Nias Kirkuki. Should Kurds have alliance with Israel?
Well, whether you like it or not, it's already taking place. Why not? All the Arabs are having alliances with Israel. Why not Kurds? I mean, what's so wrong with the Israelis? I'll tell you something. This was because of our naive way of thinking in the 60s and 70s when we were supporting the Palestinians. And so, we made it a taboo not to cooperate with the Israelis or contact them. But I have, since 1991, an advisor of Shimon Peres was actually taking contact with me in a peace conference in Denmark after the first Gulf War. And it has continued, and now they are having contact with all over. They even sent a delegation to meet Muslim Abdi. They sent a delegation to meet Ilham Ahmed. And Ilham Ahmed openly said, yes, we have had negotiations with them, but I didn't go to Israel. They are even having contacts with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, with Jordan, and Emirates as well. I mean, as far as politics is concerned, my friend, the old man, Winston Churchill said something perfect and very, very important. He said, in politics, there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. So we should act accordingly. I mean, we should be clever enough. Now our interests are to work and cooperate with everybody who can help us so that our people in Iranian Kurdistan as well can get their rights. We get rid of this regime, and this will change the whole Middle East model. We would be actually one of the most important factors in the Middle East as far as Middle Eastern politics is concerned. And hopefully will become a very important actor as far as Middle Eastern politics is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question from Khalil Ibrahim Shakar. Kak Omar Sheikhmous, thank you for your inspiring talk. Based on your experience, why do you think Kurds in northern Kurdistan do not discuss their sovereignty rights, political, geographical, or any other form? And why don't they define themselves as a national identity in any way? Spas.
Well, actually, they in the 80s and up to the 90s, they were before us all. They were asking for independent Kurdistan, a united independent Kurdistan. But then later on, there was a metamorphosis in the thinking of Abdullah Öcalan, and he has changed his approach to things. And they are thinking that they can achieve some of their rights peacefully within the parliamentary system. But my observation is this: it's not bad, and I have actually told them in the 90s as well that you can achieve quite a lot through parliamentary elections and peaceful means rather than guerrilla war. But the problem is that most of the compromises now in this process are being made by the Kurds while the Turkish government is not taking any steps. And they are always saying that there will be a commission, there will be a proposal, there will be a bill, but we do not see anything. And I think that the DEM party and the people there, they should put more pressure on the Turkish government. Well, anyhow, now what is taking place in Iran and in Syria is putting the Turkey in a very tight spot, and they are very much worried that, of course, this will affect their situation, and of course it will. And then there is the possibility that what's his name, Erdogan is. Everybody has been telling me he's so ill for the last 10 years, but he's still alive. So, but you never know, man.
Yeah. Thank you, Mustafa. Another question is from Mirhat Kaya. What do you think about the population of the Kurds? You mentioned that they are 50 million in overall. Does this number fluctuate in Kurdish studies, or these numbers are obtained through other resources? Thank you.
My friend, I'm terribly sorry about that. These figures have always been estimates because there are no specific census about the number of Kurds in any of these states. So they have always been estimates. And now some people have done certain scientific studies. And they have taken, for example, the Iraqi census of 1957, and they have made projections from those figures as to how many are the Kurds there. In Turkey as well, there were certain censuses that have been used. And I think in Syria, the same is taking place. But these are not solid figures. These are all estimates, and I must admit that it's only an estimate. I cannot for sure. Some are saying it's 40 million, some are saying it's 65 million, some are saying it's 50 million. But we know that it is at least 40 million people in these four countries, if you don't consider Afghanistan and other places. Then there is, of course, something that I forgot to mention for you. The Kurds and the diaspora are playing a very important role in mobilizing for the Kurdish cause. I mean, when we came to Europe, we were only a few hundred in 62, 61. Now there are at least a million and a half of very active Kurds all over the world. And we have people in parliaments, we have people in parties, we have people in media. We have extremely very clever youngsters that are playing a very important role in lobbying for the Kurdish cause. And this is actually is helping us quite a lot. I mean, I can only give you two examples which are very important. I mean, her name, a lady who is now the US ambassador in Cairo, her name is Hero Mustafa. She comes from a village in Arbil plain. She became first in charge of a US mission in Mosul and then in Afghanistan. And then she became an advisor to Joe Biden as vice president. And now she is the ambassador of the United States in Cairo. And there are a number of figures like that in the European Parliament and different parliaments of different countries in Europe. So we have a certain weight, not only as far as politicians are concerned, but even in arts, in culture, in literature, in many other fields. The Kurds are playing a very important role. We are becoming like the Armenians and the Jews of the 40s and 50s.
Mhm. Thank you, Musta. We have one more question from Khayal Kartel. And Musta, you mentioned that in 1960s you were somewhat naive in taking a transactional stance towards Israel and choose not to engage with them, but that your perspective changed in the 1990s. Today, many Muslim majority countries, including Turkey and several Arab states, maintain diplomatic or business relations with Israel. However, a significant number of Kurds still tend to treat any relationship with Israel as a taboo. What's your insight on this, or why do you think this perception still persists among many Kurds?
It's very important, and I'm glad you put the question the way you did. I mean, we all condemn the treatment of the Israeli right-wing Israeli government against the people of Gaza and the West Bank. And I have actually participated in many demonstrations here in Stockholm against these violations of human rights against them. We, at the same time, condemn what Hamas did against the Jewish settlers and villages when they were attacked in October. But this does not legitimize these horrible crimes that the Israeli government has committed against the Palestinians. especially some of them that took the form of genocide. I personally, I mean, among us youngsters who were very left-wing in the 60s, both Jalal and I, and a number of other people as well, we joined and helped the Palestinians a number of years. But we were extremely disappointed during Halabja, where Edward Said and others denied that the Iraqi government has used chemical weapons against them. And we got a shock out of that. But this, of course, does not mean we accept the rights of the Palestinians to their state, but we do not accept Hamas to represent the Palestinian people. That is the problem, is that they committed a lot of crimes as well. But I personally support the rights of the Palestinians very strongly to a two-state solution. And they made a mistake. I mean, we always say to them as well, we say to ourselves, please do not repeat the mistakes of the Palestinians of everything or nothing. I mean, if they had accepted the 1948 solution, they would have had a state of their own. In 48, they said no. 56, they said no. 67, they said no. 73, they said no. 82, they said no. In 2000, no. 2003, the same thing. Now they can hardly, even the two-state solution is not being accepted by the Israelis now, because of what Hamas has done. But of course, this does not mean that one should deny their legitimate rights, their right to existence.
Thank you, Mustafa. Actually, I have a question which is actually related to this question. I have seen on social media or among the Kurds around me that because of a possible Kurdish alliance with Israel, many Kurds are experiencing a type of tension in their identities. Whether should I focus on my Kurdish identity and solely seek what benefits Kurdish politics and for the Kurds, or should I focus on my Muslim identity and basically keep a stance against anything to do with Israel? Do you observe anything like this, Mustafa, or how do you think Kurds who experience such an internal conflict in their identities, they can reconcile this dilemma?
I've noticed this. That's a very good observation. There is a problem as far as taking positions is concerned, as a Kurd vis-a-vis the Palestinian rights and vis-a-vis what the right-wing government of Netanyahu and Israelis are doing against them. So we were cooperating with each other quite a lot. I mean, we should be open-eyed about things. That there are possibilities of cooperating with each other among the different peoples in the Middle East. We should not, as I said, we should not take a cross against anybody that we cannot work with them or cooperate with them and so on and so forth, except for very extremist ones, like fascist ones or terrorist ones, or the ones that are committing terrible human rights crimes. But as far as the cause is concerned, the just cause is concerned, it's quite natural for us to support it, and whether it's Palestinians, Israelis, Kurds, or whoever.
Okay, thank you, Mustafa. I think I saw Mustafa Khayal Kartal's. Do you have a question?
I do, but I don't know if you have still time. I don't want to take Mustafa's time.
We were planning to go until 15 more minutes. So if you have question, we have 10 more minutes. Of course, if Omar is still feeling well, because I know you have been sick, Mustafa.
Please go ahead. And we are friends on Facebook. I know, I've seen you.
Sloppy Mustafa. My question is, and what Bean already asked, Kurds been in solidarity with Palestinians for a long time. Not only Muslim Kurds, I'm not a Muslim Kurd. I'm a proud Kurd, but not Muslim Kurd. What we've seen, on the other hand, from Palestinian movement is every year getting away from Kurdish movements, not recognizing, not supporting, not on the ground. Not, I live in New York and elsewhere in America. Our young Kurdish sisters and brothers are being even arrested in protest against Israel with their Palestinian sisters and brothers. On the other hand, we never see them in our events, in our protests. So there is the lack of support from Palestinian movements, despite our support. And this should not be transactional, of course. We do for humanitarian reason, because there is an unjust power source against them. Why do you think Palestinian movement, in the beginning, however, we had more communication apparently, and that was decades ago, but for the last maybe 2-3 decades, their movement is getting far away from us, not acknowledging, not supporting what had happened. However, we are still in stand with Palestinians. Why we are not seeing them supporting us in return?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And if you ask them, they will not be able to give you an answer themselves. The secular and left-leaning groups would still have a very positive view of the Kurds, but the nationalistic ones and the Islamic ones are taking, for example, Hamas sent a number of their refugees to be settled in Afrin. And this was very negatively taken by the Kurds. But at the same time, there are certain Palestinian writers and poets who are taking a good position in supporting the Kurds. But they are becoming less and less. I agree with you. They are becoming much less than before. And it's one of the reasons that I can give is that because they are getting support from countries like Saudi Arabia, Erdogan's Turkey, and Qatar. And that's why they are becoming much more negatively inclined towards. But the more leftist Palestinians that are becoming very few nowadays, like for example PLO, we still meet every other year or every third year together in socialist international meetings in different places, and we have good relations. And they came even to Slemania last year, the leader in the leadership of PLO, and Nabil Shaath and some others. And they played a very important role. One of them was the gentleman who used to be the head of the government, the Palestinian government on the West Bank, Dr. Riyad something. So there is conflicting ways, the way you have in Turkey as well. I mean, there are some people who would support us. There are some people who would not support us because of their ideological differences. But it's a big disappointment for us. We never expected, as a matter of fact, because, well, okay, we helped them a lot, but they helped us a lot as well in the 60s and 70s. I mean, I remember we sent something like 4 or 5 groups of our Peshmergas to get trained in their camps in Lebanon in the beginning of the 80s, and some people from Turkey as well. And many of the people that came and went to the Bekaa came through our people who were in Syria at that time. One of them was Cengiz Candan, who was a Maoist then. Search around.
Okay, thank you, Mamosta Omar. This includes our Q&A session. And if you would like to rewatch the lecture, a recording will be available on Zahra Institute's social media pages on YouTube and Facebook. Our next speaker series event will be on the limits of modern Islamic political thought, the radical ideas of Hoca Mehmed Efendi Sadık Efendi, with Alp-Eren Topal of Ibn Khaldun University on Wednesday, March 25th at 12 p.m. Chicago time, which is Central time zone. And stay updated on our future events and programming. Please follow Zahra Institute social media on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn pages.